The Italian-American neighborhood wasn't just a neighborhood, it was a village. Same trust, same community, same logic that held together Southern Italian communities for centuries. It just relocated to another continent. My parents had it, but I didn't. And by the time I was old enough to go looking for it, most of it was gone. The neighborhood wasn't built for just convenience. It was built to replace the paese. Trust, insularity, being homogenous, everyone Italian, everyone known, your world small and legible. It wasn't a limitation, it was design, made for survival, made for being comfortable. A lot of times, for many of you, your parents' version and their neighborhood was that everyone was Italian. Everyone knew everyone. There was a level of trust, great neighbor relationships, and then what you found when you got there decades later and the gap between the two. Which is, in all honesty, what happened to me a lot of times. When you hear all these stories from your parents, from your grandparents about these old Italian-American neighborhoods and how things were, how relationships were in the neighborhood, how people went about things. And it wasn't just because of time period, it was also because of that culture of the neighborhood or the Italian background that everybody shared. So in a place like the United States that a lot of cities were melting pots, having your own kind of ethnic enclave was a very particular experience. Not just in Italian culture, in many cultures, but obviously in Italian culture, a lot of cities are known for this Little Italy concept. Being from Chicago and having areas like Taylor Street or some of the northwest suburbs like Norridge, Elmwood Park, Addison, where my parents grew up. These were areas that a high percentage of the population had Italian ancestry. They were either from Italy or their parents or grandparents were from Italy, most people in the area. So it's very homogenous, right? And a lot of these neighborhoods, regardless of where they were in the United States, had a lot of similar characteristics. And for someone like me who grew up in an area that wasn't really ethnically Italian, it's cool to think about those things and to imagine them, and then to go to these places and visit them, which a lot of people call them watered down or not the same as they once were, which in all honesty, I think is a little bit of an exaggeration because yes, they're not as Italian. There's not as high of a percentage of people of Italian descent living in the neighborhood anymore, but these neighborhoods still offer cultural gems for a lot of people in my generation to explore, whether it's museums, bakeries, restaurants, historical societies, social clubs, churches, a lot of things that still exist that have not went away over the generations and that we should continue to support. I think what it really comes down to is that Italian Americans became successful for the most part as an ethnic group in America, and there was no need to continue to stay in the neighborhood and rely on everybody in your neighborhood for everything. You didn't need an Italian butcher and baker and barber and real estate agent and accountant. You could move on into somewhere else a little bit more affluent, maybe a little bit further from the city, which I think is what we've seen in a lot of places like, whether it's Chicago or Philadelphia or New York City, Boston, and beyond. And of course, not everyone's experience was the same. There was a small percentage of Italian Americans that went to work in mines or that went to work on farms, especially in places like Louisiana. However, the overall urban Italian American experience is actually pretty similar across the board, from my experience, even seeing what these neighborhoods look like in the modern day and what they once were through history, through museums, and through research. So a couple of the neighborhoods that I visited, I've brought up some Italian enclaves of Chicago, being Taylor Street, being the northwest side of Chicago, which isn't really specific enclave. It's kind of referred to as Harlem Avenue, which is a very Italian area still, whether it's people that are living in the area or it's the institutions, establishments that still exist over there and the festivals and all of that stuff that still go on. Obviously, they're not what they once were, but they still offer a lot of amazing experiences, particularly through food. I mean, we are a culture known for food, so you're going to go to an Italian neighborhood a lot of times, Italian American neighborhood, I should say. You're going to find a lot of bakeries and restaurants, and those are the things that have lasted and passed the test of time. And then last year, I took a trip through some of the Little Italy neighborhoods of New York, being the Little Italy in Manhattan, which in all honesty is very, very small at this point. It's been kind of closed in on from all angles, and it's just a few streets. But there are still some legitimate institutions there that have been around for a long time and are still running. And then of course there is touristy places that are overrated or overpriced and not worth the visit. But that's because areas like Little Italy's are known for food, and so they attracted big audiences, and unfortunately sometimes became a little too touristy. Then I visited the Bensonhurst and Dyker Heights areas of Brooklyn, which are a little bit less urban and more suburban. I mean, you're still in the city, you're still in one of the boroughs. However, it's just a little bit more space, more spread out. So I think those areas historically were extremely Italian overall. And obviously that's diluted quite a bit, but there's still, again, a lot of amazing parks and bakeries and restaurants that still hold this Italian soul, and it's easy to see. I mean, I walked a lot around the neighborhood and tried a lot of different places. It's still there for sure. Then I went up to Arthur Avenue in the Bronx, which a lot of people consider within kind of the urban center of the city, the most Italian area. It's also known as the Belmont area. A lot of people just refer to it as Arthur Avenue because that's where a lot of the establishments are. Whether it's the church there, or I believe it's called Our Lady of Mount Carmel, or it's the different food institutions up there, or the market. It's a really cool experience, and there's definitely still a lot of Italian culture alive there. And then moving to Boston, where there's the North End, which the North End to me is probably my favorite Little Italy. I think it's held a lot of its character. It's very old-fashioned and old school, and when I visited there once, they had a random saint procession going through the street. I didn't even know what was going on. I just turn around and there's a huge saint procession while I'm eating outside in the middle of summer. So that was funny. It's very full of Italian folks, cool tours, cool restaurants and bakeries. There just really is still a lot there. It's been one of the oldest Little Italy's continuously inhabited in the US, and you can see that. Then there's also a place like North Beach, San Francisco, which is also super Italian still. It supposedly, of course, was more in the 70s and 80s and stuff like that, but there's still a lot of great establishments. The church there still holds an Italian mass. There's a lot of great restaurants and bakeries, the parks. It's a beautiful neighborhood with still that Italian soul and character, and it's continued in the last, I don't know, maybe 5 to 10 years to even be revived more and more as people place importance on their heritage and on this neighborhood. So that's another great one that I've seen and I enjoyed visiting a few times. And then there's also Little Palermo in New Orleans, which to me, there's not too much left of. I think the Italian immigration to New Orleans was a long time ago, and the Italian population just tends to be more spread out, but there's definitely still a big influence of Italian culture in New Orleans as a whole, particularly Sicilian. And there are some cool aspects that they have and history that they have in that area and just in the city as a whole. But again, these neighborhoods are not going to be what they were 50 or 100 years ago. Time has passed. More generations have passed, maybe got more successful, went to school, moved not only just out of the city or to a different neighborhood in the city, but also sometimes to a different state. So the way that society is and the way that the modern day is, these neighborhoods are obviously struggling to survive, but it's on us as the next generation to make sure we visit these places and support. So what is left of them and the places that really truly are good and not just attracting tourists continue to stay alive and continue to have our support. So whether it was urbanization or construction that destroyed some of the Little Italy neighborhoods because highways were put in or different things were built to kind of gentrify and move out a lot of Italian populations in certain areas, or whether it was upward mobility or people marrying outside of the Italian-American ethnic group, or just people choosing to leave for better opportunities or for whatever it may be. A lot of times the neighborhood just dissolved from the inside and Italians or Italian Americans leaving it and going somewhere else, not always outside pressure. Sometimes it was internal. And a lot of times our history and our culture is dissolved when these neighborhoods dissolve. And unfortunately, that just is a fact. However, in my generation, as someone in my 20s, I am seeing a little bit of a revival of people wanting to go back to these neighborhoods, not only just to visit and support, but also live. I think people nowadays are looking for community, and a lot of people still have ties to their ethnic background, especially in our community in which we have a very strong base of Italian American culture across the US. And whether that neighborhood can be recreated or revived, like a lot of times I've seen in places like Elmwood Park outside of Chicago or even North Beach in San Francisco, we will see, and these are just my opinions as an outsider and someone who doesn't live in those neighborhoods, but I do think there is a desire to have some of that back and some of that feeling of community and that feeling of unity amongst our Italian American community. So those are kind of what is happening, or the problem, if you want to call it that. And the solution, I don't really know what it is. I don't know if there is any ability to really save these areas or to have them continue on into the future as is. It's definitely hard to keep these going besides just the memory of them or the small handful of places that exist. But it was something that initially grew out of unity, community, and survival. And now it's not necessarily what is needed in our community anymore, as we've been able to be pretty successful in the United States as a whole. So obviously there's a lot of things that are disappearing from these neighborhoods and from our Italian American culture as time goes on. So I wanted to make sure that something didn't disappear, and that is our Italian American dialect. In this book, you'll find 15 Italian American dialect words to either gift for yourself or to gift to somebody else to make sure that they don't forget the words of their family that have been passed down through the generations. Words like gavone, words like chuch, or phrases like fanabola. A lot of those words came from these neighborhoods. And right here in this book, they're available. So check the link in my description to buy your own. And this is a physical copy in my hand, but this is ebook only. So now let me ask you, what neighborhood did your Italian family used to live in the United States? And are there any of them left there still? If you like this type of content, talking about Italian American and the Italian diaspora, community and history in the world, then Odiundi is for you. I hope you enjoyed this little chat. Ciao for now, e alla prossima.